Welcome to Blockchain Security Series, the podcast where the future of Web3 security unfolds. Presented by pablito.eth.
Hello and welcome. I am Pablo Sabbatella, your guide through the intricate and evolving world of blockchain security. Each episode we dive deep into the heart of Web3, bringing you face-to-face with the pioneers and key players shaping the blockchain security ecosystem. Powered by Opsek, Web3 Operational Security. Hello guys, how are you? Welcome to a new episode of the Blockchain Security Series, episode 17. Today we have as guest Scott Renna, Senior Solutions Architect at Halborn. How are you, Scott? How's everything?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on today, Pablo. Things are great. It's Friday.
A pleasure. Yeah, it's Friday. But well, with the crypto and especially with security, there are no Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays. Like every time there's something, right?
If you're not paying attention on the weekend, you're not in it enough, basically.
Totally. Okay, well, a pleasure to have you here. We have tons of stuff to talk about. I was checking out what you did during the last 20 years or more in security. But I want to start by knowing a bit about you, right? So,
Sure.
How did you get into computers and then into cybersecurity? How's your story?
So I'm self-taught. We didn't have classes. We didn't have any of that stuff back then. You know, this was the time when we had microfiches. Started kind of using computers. It's probably been 30 years now. Basically, I taught myself to be a Unix admin. I taught myself to be a network engineer. I started working at a small local regional ISP in Silver Spring, Maryland, which is right outside of Washington, D.C. I was a DSL technician. I was a T1 engineer. But basically, in the early days of the internet, this was probably 2001. From there, I ended up becoming a systems administrator at another small place. Started deploying, various controls, whether they be host-based, VPN, WAFs, things like that. And I made the jump full-time into Symantec Riptech as a SOC analyst. That is where I got really good. I published 2 papers, one on hacking the Sony Ericsson Bluetooth stack. I noticed a flawed implementation, was able to download everything from the phone without causing the alert or the blue light to come on or anything. And then another on the risks that are present in allowing your users to install software. In this case, it was a P2P software platform, eDonkey or eMule rather, if I remember it. The risks and how it can create an incident inside of an organization. So that's kind of how I got into security. I've obviously done a lot since then, but that's sort of the beginning. Just putting the work in, learning command line, learning the fundamentals, and, it wasn't ever even really a plan. I don't even have a university degree in computer science. I have one in mathematics, but it just kind of happened. I was always into tinkering, so.
Nice. And then how did you get into crypto? How was the switch? Well, I mean, it's not a switch, right? How did you get to know all the crypto industry?
I've only been working in the industry for just over a year, but I've been a crypto hobbyist since 2012. I learned about it because prior to my work, I was working for a major defense contractor responsible for incident response, detection, things like that. And we were a defense contractor, so number one target of Chinese nation state actors. I came to know about it as a result of dealing with intrusions and incidents. For me, it was very new at the time. It was actually very new for everyone in general. And I kind of looked at the industry itself, and I think it's okay to say this, but really before 2020, 2021, the industry was still, in my opinion, very immature. still ripe with a lot more scams. We all know what they are. Not that there aren't plenty of scams today, but there just weren't as many professionals in the space. And I was going to work for Chainlink 2021. It ended up I declined it, but what I saw was the opportunity to be on the forefront. I didn't plan on getting into cybersecurity around Y2K, but it happened, and there weren't a lot of people doing it. And I just felt like, with my background in Web 2, this is cutting edge. It's emerging technology. I can actually have a really big impact and contribution and be here early in terms of the business model, the maturity, not necessarily like buying this coin or that coin, like actual functional companies like Halborn and others. So,
Yeah, I totally agree. And do you think that perhaps we are, when you remember the year 2000, like security was also in many ways like very mature? Do you see a parallelism between, let's call it Web2 security or traditional cybersecurity with blockchain security in the year 2000 to blockchain security nowadays, perhaps?
yes, that's completely the same parallel that I draw. But what's interesting is there's a lot of traditional security professionals like myself that they don't do anything related to Web3. I've spoken with many colleagues, and I seem to be one of the few. But the way I look at it, I think it's incumbent on people that have done this type of work to share it with the new generation, the next technology, because a lot of the mistakes, and we can get into this, but a lot of the mistakes that are being made in Web3, a lot of the exploits, a lot of the hacks, most of them are rooted in the same sort of attack vectors that come from traditional security. So earlier I said I'm self-taught, learn the fundamentals. We have a whole culture in Web3 of shipping, building, just delivering the product. We don't have a culture of doing it in a secure fashion. And some organizations do. But like you're saying, comparing it to year 2000, in the last 2 to 3 years, I see more organizations and more clients that we talk to that are treating security as required. It's not every organization. Look, business and security, there's always a conflict. Security costs money, right? But when you're talking about protecting large like TVLs, do you really want to not do it in a secure fashion? Like, business reputation aside, there's also potential for, legal action as a result of failure to protect customer funds. So I see a lot of parallels to it, and that's why I'm in it. That's why I'm at Halborn. It's important to me to make an impact on this community because, just in general, right, security is paramount for me. So,
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm also one of the few focusing in what I call perhaps operational security or traditional cybersecurity. And if you look at the numbers, like I always say this, 80% of the losses last year are not due to hacking smart contracts. I mean, I think it's because of a mix of, we have gotten far better in smart contracts audits.
yes.
And also the fact that we have lots of new threat actors coming with traditional cybersecurity hacking tools, or let's say. And most of the stolen funds are phishing, private keys leakage. Well, we're going to talk about all that now. And I think that, I don't know what you think about this, that there's also a thing that, as blockchain hasn't been broken, blockchain as a technology, we think that, okay, blockchain is secure, Bitcoin is secure, everything is secure, right? There's lots of people that think like that. And no, we have the human layer, let's say.
Yeah. We used to call that layer 8. If you're familiar with the OSI model of layer 1 through 7,
Yeah.
We used to call it layer 8. That's the human layer. Yeah.
I didn't know it. I know obviously the OSI, but I didn't know about the layer A. We always say that biggest vulnerability is between the keyboard and the chair. Yep.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
That's
totally.
true.
So, which were the main challenges in cybersecurity in the cybersecurity space when you started, and how different is it from today?
So when I started and I was at Symantec, 2 weeks later, MS Blaster Worm broke out.
I remember that.
We had clients that were running around with a single CD-ROM that had the patch on it and going to each computer to individually fix this. Things were very immature. People didn't have the systems in place to manage at scale. Security was very immature. Back then, we didn't have nation state actors. Google was, YouTube was around because I remember it, but Twitter was getting started a few years later, and security really was looked at as a cost center back then. And also annoying. These security guys won't let me do this. Just don't ask them because we need to do this. That culture's changed. We have a lot more threat actors. We have a lot more access. Everyone in the world has a phone. There's much more internet access than there had been prior. I don't even think Wi-Fi existed then. I don't know. I can't remember. Maybe it did. Maybe it didn't. But the access that's being provided to the world, whether you're a nation state actor or a motivated attacker from financial, or maybe you want to steal information, maybe you're just trying to leak things out on the internet. A lot of people like to do that too. It's just become a lot harder to basically architect controls and detections. The biggest challenge when you're talking about defending or preventing attacks is, as an attacker, you only have to find one way to get in. We call those red teamers. I used to be one, but I became a blue teamer because it was too easy. I used to go in through the printers because no one ever changes the default password on the printer, and no one realizes that the printer can talk to every system that's connected to it. So as a blue team or a defender, you have to find all the holes. And not just that, you need to have things that if there is an incident, you need to be able to figure out what happened. So you need logging systems. So there's a lot more tooling, a lot more cost, and in my opinion, a lot more risk today than there was 20 years ago.
I totally agree. And I like that thing that you said, that as an attacker, you only need to find the one, right? And that's key, and how different it is to attack a system than to defend it. You cannot forget about anything when you're defending it.
And similarly, what you said about phishing. Phishing's still the number one way to get in. People are still the best way to go. The number two vector, at least with traditional systems, is lack of patching and vulnerabilities, and not necessarily zero-day vulnerabilities. In these large organizations, so I worked at Barclays for a while as well. Our timeline for correcting a critical vulnerability, I think, was 3 days. We had to patch it, right? But for medium vulnerabilities, it was like 30 days. So the point is, yes, the criticals are important, but that's still a window of time where someone could exploit it. So it's, again, number one is the people, but number two is just a lack of mature processes, managing things, patching things. Again, now we have orchestration tools. We have things that can go out and push the updates. We did then, but people just didn't use them. So.
Yeah. I totally agree. And when we send massive patches, it can happen what happened some months ago with I forgot the name of the company. CrowdStrike. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There's debate about that in the community. Some people say it's not a security event. Some people say it is a security event. I would say.
What do you say?
Yeah, I would say if you understand the CIA triad of security, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, I would say that falls in the category of a loss of availability. So I view it as a security incident. We'll have to see what comes out in terms of potential legal action for lost revenue for many different organizations. But it's a very interesting story because it's a case where again, not all the details are out, but based on the information provided, it was not a malicious actor. It was a mistake. It was a bug that just wasn't quality checked. again, Web3, we ship things, we build, right? We're always building. Sometimes QA and quality control it becomes less important because the focus is on shipping. So that I find that case to be very interesting, just because of how CrowdStrike is embedded in so many Fortune 100 organizations. So
yeah, in Web3, someone once said, "We test in prod, then happens what happens," right? But I remember that.
it's true.
And also one thing regarding the CIA triad that you said, I think that something that happens to blockchain, mostly to users, is that they focus too much in confidentiality and not availability. And if we check stats, they say, I don't know if it has been verified, like, I don't know, 25% of Bitcoins have been lost. Not because they were stolen, but like, I don't know where is my private key. I know I had it in a disk, encrypted, or a paper, or whatever, I lost it. And most of the cases that I receive are from people that, regarding loss of funds for the long term, is because they lost that, right? So I think that it's something that we should also focus a lot on. Well, you have been working in cybersecurity in several industries, like, right? You worked in defense, finance, retail, and now Web3.
Yep.
What have you learned from each one of them? And is there a field that you find more challenging working than others?
Well, so what I've learned, I've learned that when you work in government, people think it's really cool. I mean, and in reality, it is. I got to see some of the most advanced nation-state attacks, right? We had the first ever nation-state web shell, where I was a very well-known defense contractor. Put it that way. If the listeners aren't aware of what a web shell is, it's basically a listening, program that's running on a web server. So why is this important? Well, one, it was the first time a nation state had ever used one against the United States. But two, when you are talking about timekeeping systems, if you have to log in every day and report the number of hours that you worked, in the United States government, that's a requirement. It's a DCAA requirement. So every day, if you're doing government work and as a contractor, you have to log into that system and you have to report your number of hours. So now imagine you have a very large company, 40,000 people. Every single one of them has to log into that web server every day to record their time. And that web shell is capturing every time the password. So it doesn't matter if you force a password reset, for all the users, because the next day they have to go to that system and they have to put their new password in. So I learned from that sort of the traditional view when there's a security incident is like, oh, let's like refresh everything, let's roll out our image, let's force a password reset. If you're not thinking about other areas, and it kind of ties back to what you said about, losing your private key, people just weren't thinking about that. They weren't thinking that all of the traditional measures that had worked before are not going to work in this case. So yeah, I got really good, by the way, doing that. I attribute that's why I feel very confident. And it's not an easy role to have, incident response. Anyone that's done it understands that it's always on the holidays. It's always when something is happening, you might be doing 14 or 16-hour days. It's very demanding, but if you do it, you're going to probably get good at that. Financial vertical, things move very slowly, just like government. They're obviously naturally risk averse. We have a lot of big banks as clients at Halborn, and we've done some significant work. I can't share all of the names, but I just did a DLT architecture panel with Citibank last week with our CTO. So we've done a lot of work for Citibank. We have done work for large clearinghouses and this and that, but the work is typically not rushed. Like you say with Web3, we test in production, right? That doesn't happen in the financial vertical. So I would say in terms of traditional financials, things move more slowly, probably about the same speed as government. But the reason for that is what I said earlier. They're protecting a lot. They're not, I guess you wouldn't call it TVL in a bank, but maybe if you want to. There's a lot of risk. There's a lot of fiduciary responsibility that they have. So things are much more thoughtful, planned out. And again, we do a lot of advising work. So their attitude is, we're not just going to build something and have a security company like Halborn look at it. We want to talk to you about how we should build it, so we don't have tech debt, so we don't have, vulnerabilities that we have to go back and fix and just scrap the whole thing. That's kind of that industry. Working in the retail sector, they tend to be more innovative and adoptive of products. Again, the business model is business to consumer, business to customer. So the more novel, the more things we can have, the better. The challenges there tend to be more based around fraud, whether it be not necessarily, like you probably heard about this, like DNA like did not arrive. This is why like Amazon and everyone takes the photo, when they bring it to your house. So there's a lot of fraud. There's also a lot of compromise of customer accounts, because typically as a customer of Walmart.com or whatever, Mercado Libre, wherever, you're just going to use one password. You're not going to use multi-factor authentication. That's a big difference from what you see in the financial vertical and the government vertical. And then I guess being crypto, there's a rapid adoption of technology in crypto. Bleeding edge. We want the best tools. We're going to try this. We'll see if it works. If it doesn't work, we'll try something else. So probably hyper innovative, hyper risk appetite. For me, I enjoy it because I've worked in different speeds and different paces. Even when I was at Barclays, I had left Barclays. I went to a kind of the first company of its kind, a phishing company called PhishMe. First of its kind that came out. The idea was, hey, all these technical controls, they're still not stopping all the attacks. And at this point, I had been doing incident response for 6 years, and I thought there must be another way. Like maybe I can focus on people. Maybe we can have people recognize when something's suspicious, so that just a little half-second hesitation. And I did a lot of that, but I remembered when I resigned, my old boss is still there. Stephen Hall is a great guy. I said, I want you to know you've been an amazing boss. It's not you. And he said, I know, mate. This place just doesn't move fast enough for you. So this place is older than your country, this bank. I'm like, I just really appreciated that he said that. And then I wanted him to know that it's not him. He's a great guy. But for me, I like the speed. I like the innovation. I don't like waiting around to make things happen. I like trying things. But of course, in a safe and secure manner as much as possible.
You just talked about incident response, right?
Yes.
And one more thing I wanted to ask you regarding retail and fraud. Like, you used to have fraud from, let's say, a normal client like me. I buy some books and I said, no, I didn't receive it, right? You treat that as a kind of fraud, and then you have fraud from, people who steal my user and buy things. And then did you also have, that I have been seeing some videos the last days, fraud from people delivering packages too, right? So you have to understand, like, okay, this person says that he didn't get the package. Who can be doing? Did he not really not receive it? Was the delivery guy? Was that person? Was it perhaps stolen by someone that got it from the front door?
Yeah, and the problem with that is usually, again, you have to think about this. Retailers' clients are people like you and I and a lot of our listeners. They don't want to risk losing revenue from you. You've probably seen it with Amazon. Sometimes you don't have to return it, if it doesn't arrive. But those costs, they have to bear those costs. The other thing is accounts are for sale all over the dark web. Prior to coming to Halborn, I worked for 3 years at Flashpoint, which is a dark web intelligence vendor. It's like a Google for all the nastiest parts of the dark web, basically. But we would see things for sale in there. It's called a browser fingerprint. Most people, for example, they save their login and password on their browser. It's very common. If they get infected by malware, typically it will lift what's called a browser fingerprint. Browser fingerprint not only includes the saved passwords, but it also includes cookies. So usually you don't have to re-log into a site because, again, it's supposed to be easy. We don't want to make it difficult for you to spend money. The persistent cookie will enable you to sort of log in. These browser fingerprints, Pablo, they're like $10. And they're all for sale. Like there's wholesalers, there are people that this is a business, this is an industry. So things like that, it's another area for fraud. But specifically, what you see in security is there is a delineation. There is cybersecurity, which is my core competency. There is fraud, which I'm actually pretty good at, but it's not my number one thing. And then there's PhysSec, physical security, trying to actually penetrate a facility, war driving around. I've done some of this work in the past, but mostly I focus on the cyber side of the house. So. I'm unable to hear you.
There we are. We just talked about dark web and, data that is still stolen from users, and basically they get some malware in their computer and then the stealer steals everything. So I have a question for you there that in the last weeks, I have been with one more person analyzing a very, very big leak, nas.api, for sure you know it. And we are analyzing like what's the impact for centralized exchanges there. And we were analyzing all this, and we had a question that I haven't found an answer to, right? We said, okay, let's say that I wanna offer companies to say, okay, as soon as some information about your users is leaked in the dark web, I'll let you know. So you can block that user, right? So we said, okay, great. We have to go and get the information first. If you get the information when it's in the news or when it's available for free in the dark web, it's already old,
too late,
right? So if you want to be one of the first ones in getting that information, you basically have to pay for it. And
correct.
If you're paying for it, you are giving the incentive to the criminal to keep on stealing data, right? So our question is, forget about ethical stuff, right? Let's say, like, being practical. We don't want these guys to we want to stop them. We don't want to give them an incentive. Do you think that there's a solution to that, or any idea or something that Flashpoint used to do that you can share, perhaps?
It's always an individual client or organization's decision to take, right? We worked a lot of ransomware cases. The Colonial Pipeline incident, this was public, so I can share it. That was negotiated by Flashpoint. So we didn't make any, suggestions or requests because, again, we're in the business of doing business. My personal opinion is, yes, you are correct. It incentivizes and drives the behavior. But what's the alternative? What's the solution? The solution is implementing security controls. Biggest challenge with ransomware is people don't have backups. So now they've gotten encrypted. They don't have key backups. And this goes into business continuity planning, disaster recovery planning, continuity of operations planning, all of that. Most organizations don't have a solid plan around that. So their only option is to pay the ransom, or they're probably going to be out of business. So a lot of it impacts smaller organizations, although there are breaches. I mean, the U.S. Social Security number database was breached. Equifax has been breached. United Healthcare has been breached. OPM, Office of Personnel Management, that's the people that issue the government clearances, the one that I had, they've been breached. So it's easy to think that, and I do believe that people are just desensitized to it. It's easy to think this is just what happens. It doesn't have to. But again, it comes down to prioritizing security over business.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and the other thing that I said when we were discussing this is criminals will be paying for this. I don't know how many. If one is also paying, you are giving them money, okay, but you are also like using that information. You're paying them, but you're making that information not be useful anymore, let's say, right? Or some part of that data. But anyways, it's not so easy. And I don't know really if it's legal or not also to do that, right? But when you're in this, you're in the edge, right?
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, the legality, I think, varies depending on jurisdiction. But yeah, you're right. You know, if you're paying this data for this data, you're incentivizing it and you're running a business. But it's going to keep continuing. And whether or not, it depends upon the quality of the data, right? So when we talk about credit card data, right? If you can get what's called the track data, if you can get that, that's much.
What is the track data?
There's two tracks on a credit card. It's where it's all encoded, like the traditional swiping. Now it's in the chip. I know that outside the United States, the chip technology has been adopted for much longer. But if you can get one of these cards potentially that's Visa verified, right? Another level, more information. If you have the home address, if you have all of this, those credit cards cost a lot more money because they can be used almost immediately. But of course, credit card companies are also monitoring these places. They're interested to see what's going to happen. And, you know, we did have many financial customers at my last role as well, just like we have at Halborn. It's a different focus, but it's about working with what I would say, you know, enterprise level people that understand the space and understand how is this going to help either solve my problem or reduce what it costs me from a fraud perspective, cost savings. That's, again, another thing. If you buy a security control or you implement technology or whatever, what does it save me? How much potentially could it save me? And one of my clients at Flashpoint, my last role, told us that they realized $6 million in fraud loss savings in 6 months. That's good return on investment. Of course, my sales guy said we should have charged them more. So, but like there are real savings, and if you kind of go about it the right way and, you know, work with the right technology.
Yeah, you made me remember like 2 years and a half ago, approximately, in Argentina, there was a very big database from a big group called Cencosud that had like lots of shoppings and supermarkets and stuff. And like approximately 8 million credit cards from Argentinians were published in the dark web, like full name, address, credit card, secret thing, the everything. But they decided not to cancel those credit cards. I mean, we checked with some friends, our credit cards were there, and they did nothing. I don't know, perhaps they said, no, it's too much, we have to send credit cards to everyone now again. But I'd like to think there's someone that said, no, it's better not to cancel all of them by some reason. I like to think that there's someone thinking about that stuff with real data, right? I don't know if it happens like that.
Typically, incident details are kept very close. Like I said, I've worked plenty of incidents. There's no information about them out there, so it's, you know, same sort of thing.
Well, now I was just gonna ask you a bit about that. Let's go to Web 2 and Web 3. What lessons are there lessons learned from Web 2 security incidents that Web 3 companies should consider to improve their own security strategies? And what do you think related to this with postmortems and being like really transparent on this is what happened, this is what we learned?
So a lot of the issues that exist in Web3, whether they be smart contract vulnerabilities, whether they be related to the infrastructure, again, comes down to a lack of experience in the space, right? So when we see bugs, CrowdStrike, talked about it earlier, or you could use any piece of Web2 software. It's due to coding errors. Maybe it's a logic bug, you know, maybe it's a flow bug, maybe you're not sanitizing the input, whatever the case may be. We see that happen in smart contracts all the time, you know, not checking to make sure a piece of collateral is going to be accepted or requiring a specific type of collateral, things like that. So I would say in general, most people, when they're learning to code, they're just learning to code. They're not learning secure coding methodologies. That's a big lesson. That's one. The second is there seems to be this view in Web3 natives, not all, but a lot that I talk with. They don't understand that Web3 doesn't exist without Web2. You can't get on the chain without traditional infrastructure. And that's one of the reasons I came to Halborn. It's been a year and a half almost now at this point. We have an off-chain practice. We call it off-chain, but it's cloud infrastructure security, mobile app security. So it's not just necessarily, I'm on the chain and this and that. It's the infrastructure that underpins it, right? So a lot of more sophisticated clients will use kind of container technology, but Amazon's Nitro Enclaves, they're great, by the way. They isolate process memory, all of this. They understand that the systems that enable the blockchain portion of things to function have to be protected. In general, so we did this sort of like state of DeFi, kind of 6 years of data showing like what are the most common hacks, this and that. I think it was like something, I have to go back and get the exact number, like 46% were off-chain related crypto hacks. People just don't think about it. And then the last one, which is near and dear to me since I was at PhishMe for 6 years running phishing campaigns, again, for Fortune 100s all the way down to the smallest, whatever, is phishing is going to continue. We see people, they click a link, they get drained. Oh, they click this, they click that. They haven't learned that, and I don't know why, because phishing has been around a really long time, but it's still super effective. So one other area, in my opinion, is phishing training for Web3 organizations. What if your socials get compromised, this and that? The last part of what you said about the postmortem, it's not typically done in Web2. It was done with CrowdStrike. If it's big enough, it'll be done. But in Web3, I think it's super important. I'm a user of Alex. It's a layer 2 DEX for Bitcoin on stacks. Alex was compromised a few months ago, and they weren't hacked. What happened was, and they were public about it, which was they should have been a little bit faster, but that's okay. They had a single signer key controlling access to the liquidity pools. One engineer with a single signer. So that is not a failure of confidentiality, like you said earlier. It's a failure of security process. Everything else is good. They have a good offering. Velar is also very good. But I think it's super important to be very public about a breach, what has happened, what corrective actions you've taken, because these days, and Web3 is a great example of this, but we live in an attention-driven economy in all facets, right? If you lose the trust of your users in your brand, why are they going to use your perp dex over someone else's? Why would they? I don't know, but I feel like a lot of people just try and hide from things. But I think it's better to kind of take it head on and just explain to your users, what corrective actions you've taken, what are you going to do to make sure this doesn't happen again, and why that they should still trust you with their funds.
Yeah, regarding that, some months ago, we had a chat with Mata from the Red Guild at an event, and we analyzed the top 25 from Rect, and from there, I don't know, I think that it was half of that was off-chain stuff, and from those, like more than half of them, there was no postmortem, and we think that because they don't even know what hit them, right? What happened? That's the worst. I see lots of cases, mostly with just normal users. Okay, yeah, my private key got leaked. I created a new wallet. That's it. You have no idea what happened. In fact, I remember a case from a friend that said, yeah, I downloaded something, my wallet got stolen, so I got a new one. Okay, but I mean, like joking, I said, you formatted your computer or something, right? No, but it's okay. What the fuck? Yeah,
I typically, I mean, I guess I'm just because I've seen so much. I don't like to use my phone to trade. I have, but in general, I don't think you should keep your wallet on your phone. Why? One reason. We talked about phishing earlier, right? On a computer, it's a little bit easier to sort of hesitate before you click something. On a phone, people are clicking things all the time. I just feel it's too risky. I would actually recommend for most people, and financially this is not always possible, but if you have a separate system, a separate computer that you only use it for crypto trading, I would recommend that, because I don't know what you're doing on the other computer. I don't know what you're downloading, but maybe you want to watch a stream of like, the Copa or like Champions League or whatever. You don't know like what that site is putting onto your computer, and that's where your wallet is. So again, I know it's not always possible, but I recommend it. I mean, I always recommend hardware wallets, but people are going to do what they're going to do. Oh, I can't be bothered to set that up.
Yeah.
Okay.
I haven't thought about that. Like, is there statistics showing that people are victims of phishing more usually on phones than on computers? I haven't thought about that. But it's logical.
Yeah, I mean, the only way to do that is you'd have to analyze the user agent. So when you click the link, you'd have to see that it's Android or, I don't know what Apple WebKit, whatever. I don't have the data on it. It's just a personal feeling that in general, people are always on their phones. So I just view it as higher risk.
Yeah, and I always recommend clients, as you're saying, like to have two separate devices, right? Or at least a virtual machine, like do all the stupid stuff inside the virtual machine, and then in the rest. That's very important. I mean, there's a culture of having hardware wallets, but there's also the problem that many people buy the hardware wallet and never configure them. That happens like a lot. Like more than half of people that I have made some polls that bought hardware wallets never started using them. Like, but then what we don't have is like this thing of having a separate computer, a separate device, right? When you're gonna do some stuff. So I think that's very good. So going back to incident response, how does incident response in the Web3 space differ from traditional incident response methods used in Web2 environments?
A lot. The biggest difference is the speed. Things move way faster in Web3. Web2, maybe you have a few days to like tackle it, to get it done. In Web3, it's over. Immediate. Funds are gone. Can't get them back. So the speed is one thing, but that to me leads to sort of the need for preventative tools, because detection is not enough in Web3. In Web2, if you can detect the attacker, maybe you can take corrective actions, so they can't get any further, although there are great prevention technologies as well. Detection is, I guess, useful in Web3, but it's not going to help you. So that's one area. The other area is there's a lack of tooling today. There's some great stuff, by the way, for monitoring and prevention, but it's only really on Ethereum right now. There's not really anything for Solana yet. The reasons for that are due to just technical complications, right? So you have to pay rent in your Solana wallet to keep it active, and like just the difference in the protocol as an example. But the tooling that's out there, whether it be like the FortiBots or Open Zeppelin Sentinel, it's decent. I don't see a lot of firms adopting it because it costs money, and typically when you're talking to a Web3, they're trying to raise money, this and that. The priority is not security. The priority is talent, getting the smart contracts built and things like that. I do see more adoption in the enterprise space of these types of preventative methodologies and tooling. The other thing I would say, and you probably know this, but a lot of financials are very interested in permissioned blockchains for two reasons. One, no one gets to see everything going on, so privacy. And two, control. right? The ethos of crypto is decentralization. The truth of the matter is, though, most people don't care about centralization. Regular people, Solana is popular because it's fast and cheap. Why do you think it's fast and cheap? What did you have to give up for it to be fast and cheap? Versus if you're going to do a transaction and buy a rune or buy an ordinal on Bitcoin, it's slow. Why is it slow? Well, because we've chosen decentralization for that. So I don't think the normal, average, regular person thinks about that. And I really I used to believe it. I no longer believe that regular people care about centralized risk.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that 95% of the ecosystem doesn't care about decentralization. But I think that it's similar to privacy and security. Nobody cares about privacy. Nobody cares about security. Nobody cares about decentralization until something happens, and then you care. With security, it's obvious. You have an incident. What you said about some companies don't want to pay. Okay, you think that security is expensive? Try with an incident, and then we'll see.
We used to always get budget when there was an incident, and I would always tell my team, never waste a crisis. No. I know it's crazy. This is terrible to happen. Don't waste it. Like, this is your opportunity to get the tooling you need, to get the budget you need that you've been asking for a year, because now something bad has happened. And unfortunately, you have to clean it up. But that's typically when budgets become unlocked and you take advantage of the crisis.
Yeah. I think that luckily that is changing a bit. I used to get like 100% of my clients after an incident. Now it's like less than 0.5%, and I am very happy about that. I mean, I think I make also lots of work like sharing stories of this happened. Everyone tells me, "Oh, I listen to your talks, and we get out of there with like frightened." And they say, "Okay, that's the idea. That's the idea." So you realize that this is real, right? And but
yeah, we see a similar trend at Halborn. So Halborn has been around for about 5 years. So started 2019. Like I said, I only joined last summer, but really good hackers, really good red teamers, like true cyber professionals. But more and more, because of all the incidents that have been happening with smart contracts and drains and this and that, people want to get their stuff audited. They want someone to look at it, because our goal is to make sure whatever protocol it is, it doesn't matter if it's the tiniest DGEM protocol or a big bank, is to make sure your launch goes and you do not get hacked. That's our objective. And we're seeing more and more people doing security audits. You mentioned the rec report. If you reviewed it, a lot of the biggest ones have unaudited smart contracts. So, like you said, if you think this is expensive, just wait.
Yeah, I totally agree. Also, as we were saying, you said like Web3 does not exist without Web2. I totally agree about that. So they are totally interconnected. So how can companies address the risks that arise from this interaction between Web2 and Web3? Do you think they are doing it, or they just, okay, we're going to launch, we have to audit the smart contract, and we are it. We have checked it. Checked it, and next.
Yeah, I think some people are, aware of that. I think people that have come from traditional IT backgrounds, when you look at Web3, it's largely very young, right? So maybe not as much exposure, not the realization that, the smart contract is just one part of it. So we do have a lot of clients that we do work for on both on and off chain, because they understand how important it is. Whether it be like, how is your MPC set up? How are you sharding it? What's your recovery key package? All of that. It's great that you have the keys that you need to sign the transactions and make the things go. But how does that actually occur? It occurs on systems and servers that would be classified as Web 2. So I'm seeing more and more customers consider that. Usually I have to mention it, but a more sophisticated a little bit more like work experienced in general, they typically are well aware of that.
Nice. Yeah, and I think that you also see that difference regarding security people in the ecosystem. That you have people that come from traditional cybersecurity and people that started with security with blockchain. That most of them are focusing auditing smart contracts, and I see that you also see a big difference there, right?
Yeah, but it's like anything else, right? So that's your core competency. That's what you've done. That's what you're really good at. It makes sense that you might not be so good at cloud hacking, or mobile app hacking or whatever. Like that's not where your focal area is. So I think it's important to have blends of both.
Yep. So often our own security does not depend only on what we can do, but on third parties, right? So can you explain the risks associated with these dependencies and how they can be mitigated?
Yeah, so from a third-party perspective, it could be like a human element, right? You do third-party business, you get some services from some other company. It can also be code-based. If you're utilizing third-party libraries, which typically most people are, it's a major issue. I always tell people, the Open Zeppelin libraries have been audited tons of times. They put out a lot of good stuff. Like, use code libraries that have been audited, that you're familiar with. It doesn't mean that there won't be an incident, but it's a higher degree of confidence. Numerous times there have been vulnerabilities in OpenSSL, which is a core library that enables everything on the web for SSL. Like, that's a huge deal. That stuff is going to come up, but in general, typically it's one of the safer code libraries. Those dependencies, you need them to kind of run your business in general, but that's the way that I approach it, because when people look at vulnerability management, right? Oh, we got to patch the servers. You have to do this and that. People don't look at code third-party library vulnerabilities as much. It's not as common on people's minds, but it's underneath. So that's, to me, like, it's a huge risk area. From a physical perspective, or a business perspective, or a company perspective, maybe you're outsourcing your development work. And as an example, you're not going to give them company laptops with controls. You're going to have them use their personal laptop, but they're going to connect to your cloud services. That's a third-party risk. You have no idea what's on that computer. You have no idea, what is going on, and that can create, obviously, a security event. The last example I'll give, and this is kind of a good one, in the Washington, D.C. metro area, there's an area in southern Maryland. There's a lot of defense contractors there. All the names that you would know specifically. One of the cases I worked, this company was breached. Not directly. They had great security, of course. But they worked with a third party that installed their garage doors in their physical buildings. And guess what? The garage door company doesn't have the same level of security as a defense contractor. And that is actually how the breach occurred. So it was a third-party situation again.
Yeah, totally. And now that you were talking about this other code that you used in your stack, what do you think about the XC backdoor that we saw? How it was in April, right?
Oh man, I haven't even seen it.
No, it was. Yeah. You will remember. It was the one that was discovered by a Microsoft engineer.
Okay.
That supposedly a threat actor had been working for a long time, like for 2 years, for more than 2 years, sending small updates to different libraries, and then lastly, they were doing it. I don't remember. Let me see what library it was.
Oh wow! Yeah, it's using a third-party patch for SSH.
Yeah. For SSH it was, exactly. And it was discovered by a Microsoft analyst But if that hadn't been discovered by that guy, it would have been a disaster. Because, I mean, like, perhaps I'm wrong, but most of the Linux systems in the world would have been compromised. And
Correct.
we don't know, like, we discovered this, someone discovered this. You don't know what's out there also, right? Because, and my question goes, is it useful? Like, what happens when you have open source software that everyone can audit, but no one is checking it? You have a code that has 2 contributors, right? You see the meme with the whole structure of the world, and there at the bottom, a small stick that is some guy in Nebraska updating this library for 10 years. And
Yeah.
well,
So I don't know how possible it is yet. I do think it's going to be possible probably within the next 2 to 3 years. But the utilization of AI to scan this code, because traditionally you have nation state actors, you have dedicated black hats that are studying source code. We've had source code leakage from Adobe. We've had source code leakage from Microsoft. Again, I don't know if AI is capable of doing this right now. And what you were referring to, XE utils attack, that probably is a little bit too sophisticated for AI right now, but I don't see any reason why in the near future AI can't scan code bases, old code, libraries, doesn't matter, and identify vulnerabilities. We're at the point now, and I don't know if you saw this story, but there was a capture the flag exercise that an AI did. The Docker container wasn't configured properly, so it wasn't running. So the capture the flag wasn't running. But the AI, instead of giving up, scanned the network, found an exposed API endpoint, was able to get into the container, start it, and get the flag. So as cool as that is, it's a little scary, but that's the state of where we're at. They behaved like a human being would have. Oh, it's not running. Well, maybe I can find some way to make it run. So it's really interesting where those things are heading.
yeah, and the thing is that tool, like all tools, right? That tool that will allow us to find bugs easier will also be used by criminals, by state-sponsored threat actors to find those vulnerabilities too and to exploit them, right?
Yes.
So it's yep. So let's go back a bit to Web3. What are the most common attack vectors that you're seeing targeting smart contracts?
Typically lack of validation of input sanitization. Things like reentrancy attacks where you can call a function multiple times. It's not the same as a race condition, but like I kind of in my head I think about it, whatever, like that. Poor coding practices, assuming as an example, right? Oh, well, I'm just going to assume that like this has, 6 decimal points instead of 18 decimal points, whatever. Basically not ensuring that the input you're getting, if you compare it, like as an example, if you compare it to traditional Web 2 fuzzing or hacking a website, you're sending unintended input in, or database hacking. You're testing what you're sending across to see if it's sanitized and see if it's going to be accepted. And it's the same thing that we see in smart contracts. You can send in specific types of, I mentioned collateral, or maybe an arithmetic bug. Like, oh, this is only looking for 6 decimal points. Well, I can take advantage of this. So a lot of it really comes down to just poor coding practices, not using safe libraries. OpenZeppelin is a great one, like safe lib transfer, right? It not using the right function. And it's the same problem that exists, by the way, in traditional coding and like C++, when people will use the wrong sort of command when there's a more secure way to do it. No different, right? By saying, oh, I don't want SSL, HTTP is fine. Or, oh, I'll just run FTP. Why do I need to run SFTP? So really, it's those areas: poor coding practices, poor hygiene, poor sanitization of what is submitted and transacted in general.
And from their point of view, like given your knowledge of attacker trends, right?
Yeah.
Are there specific patterns or tactics that you are seeing that are being used more frequently than others?
So the interesting part about smart contracts is once it's on mainnet, code's all there. So it's just a matter, and I haven't seen this specifically, but I can imagine it's probably being done. If someone is just copying, pasting code from Stack Overflow or wherever, right? If there is some vulnerability that's discovered, and there have been vulnerabilities that have been discovered in underlying blockchains, why not just scan the entire blockchain and look for vulnerable contracts that are using it? That is one. I would say also in general, in terms of targeting an attack, we see Ethereum being the most targeted, but also think about the number of Solidity developers versus the number of Rust developers, right? So it makes sense. Like from a data perspective, like Ethereum seems to be the place where most of the attacks are focused, but that's also the largest and most well-established smart contract blockchain that there is from that perspective. So.
And also the blockchain with the highest CVL, right? With the highest amount of money to be stolen. We talked a bit about phishing, right? But phishing is often considered an outdated threat, right? Do you think that it has evolved in some way in the Web3 space, or it's just exactly the same? Has it changed in some way in your experience, or have you seen something more sophisticated?
The biggest difference is they don't use email. Like Web3 doesn't like email. I mean, I love email, but I know it's like outdated. I don't care. I love emails. Much easier to track. They use Discord, right? We're all in Discord, this and that. So it's the same thing, except the difference is you're abusing a trust relationship. It's the same thing as when one of these Twitter accounts or X accounts gets compromised and tweets out a link. You're abusing the trust relationship that is in place between your followers and your page, whether it's a celebrity, whether it doesn't really matter. It's still a concern. It's still a risk. People want to make quick money. I mean, there's big focus on that in Web3. I mean, I'm not saying I don't, but I think it's important to sort of control whatever impulses that you have. A lot of the reasons why phishing is effective, it's not just about the link. It's about the emotional driver behind it, right? So emotional driver for like, oh, secret mint or secret drop. The emotional driver there is personal gain. That's the emotion that's being pulled on by the person. So a lot of phishing really is mind hacking. Other examples of this, you know, if you want to participate in this, you want to contribute, whether it's a project or a political campaign or what have you, is driving and pulling on belief. You know, someone's desire to have that impact. And I would say and I am not like trained psychologist or anything, but I would say psychologically speaking, since 2020 and all of the shutdowns that we had and the isolation that people have felt, more and more their world is online and they want that feeling of connection. You see this being abused with pig butchering scams. You've seen that when people try and get you to send money and then eventually they ramp up the scam and they take all the money. People are looking for that connection. Again, I have no background on this. I'm just sharing anecdotally my observations since COVID and what has happened. So I do not think phishing is an outdated threat at all, based on my responses.
Yeah, and I agree also with this thing about like a difference that I see in Web3 lately is that lots of phishing are coming from a trusted source, right? They hack the Ethereum Foundation newsletter, and you receive an email from the real newsletter. You see Hayden Adams tweeting in Discord from his real Twitter account, or they hack the front end from some website. Well, that wouldn't be phishing, really. And what I haven't seen lately, I know it has existed for a long time, but I haven't seen it in Web3, is right now there are lots of phishing attacks that do not only go for try to get like credentials, like user ID and password, but also to a face. And that's something that I hadn't seen like in practice, right? And it has been happening a lot. I don't know if you have experience with that. I don't know if it works like with a bot that on the other side is like putting the same information in the real website, or if it's being done like a person in a call center in India or whatever. But I have been seeing that a lot lately.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, with Face ID, face recognition, makes sense, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think that something good that is gonna change all this regarding 2FA and all that is Passkeys. I love Passkeys. I'm in love with that technology. What do you think about it? Do you like it?
Of course, but it has to be easy for people, right? It has to be simple for them to adopt. Otherwise, they're not going to. I use two-factor. I use passkeys, one-time passcodes. I love them. They're great, but I'm also not a like quote-unquote person that most people, Pablo, they don't sit around and think about security. They just want things to work, and like little things like that. If we can get them there, like as much as I love YubiKeys as an example, I do not see my father buying a YubiKey. I just don't. I don't see that happening, and I think it's ridiculous to expect for that to happen for people. They're not going to want it. We have to make it as simple as possible. The other thing about that, if we kind of go back to compromises, there was that LastPass breach. A lot of organizations use LastPass. In fact, I have a good friend who, unfortunately, he was storing his seed phrase in LastPass. He lost everything. But in general, right? So we tell people to use these security tools, they do it, and then there's a breach of that.
Yeah.
So it's hard.
Yeah. Two things about this. I think that what I really like about Passkeys is that I think it's easy for the user, right, to implement. And then regarding what happened with LastPass, I think that there's also one more thing. I always tell everybody, like, there's some people in security that don't believe in password managers and some people that do. I always say that I prefer like people to use password managers, but they always say password managers are for storing passwords. You do not store 2FAs and you do not store seed phrases, right? They're not for that. It's not a seed phrase manager. It's a password manager. And they also think that some things that some companies do are not so good. Like, for example, 1Password adding the feature of saving the 2FAs inside 1Password. I think that was a big mistake for me. I understand it from the commercial point of view, but I say, what the fuck is this?
Yeah.
It's complicated. So let's go a bit to nation-state actors in Web3. Are nation-state actors targeting blockchains and protocols? Why? What's the evidence that they have been doing this? What do you think about this whole new, let's call it new threat for the industry?
The motivation's money. The motivation's to avoid sanctions, OFAC, what have you. I don't know if you saw the recent news. It was either yesterday or the day before, but North Korean, employees working for major protocols, ZeroLen, Phantom, I think SushiSwap was in there.
Yearn,
and nation states are difficult because it's literally like the focal point of what someone is doing. Whether they are trying to steal money, I mean, money's the motivator here, obviously, and avoiding sanctions. But sometimes it's about stealing insider information, right? I don't want to have to spend the time to research this new drug that's coming out. I'll just steal the formula for Ozempic after they spent all the money and the time doing it. Nation states are definitely working on blockchain. Terrorist organizations are also working on blockchain. I know only terrorists use Bitcoin. Not actually true. Most money laundering is still done the old-fashioned way. But there's definitely nation-state actors that are focusing on protocols. Look at Axie. What happened with that? That was a really sophisticated hack with the Ronin bridge. Very well set up from a security perspective, but they got 3 of the 5, and that's what they needed. The same thing, flash loans. See people do that. Or what happened with Beanstalk, or manipulating other governance, However, my last comment I'll make on this, with what happened with Luna. Luna wasn't hacked. Never. They were not hacked. But the coordination, calculation, and then the move to sell the Luna Foundation Bitcoin, the Bitcoin Guard, I think it was orchestrated by nation-state actors. Maybe not of specific nations. But that was a very well-constructed attack that involved a lot of money and resources. And there aren't many individuals that have access to that type of capital to make that happen. So Luna's great, but it's unfortunate with what happened.
Yeah, and also in the report that you were just saying that was published yesterday, they were saying that they estimate that 50%, like half of the resumes of people that Web3 companies receive are from North Korea. That's crazy. Even if it was 10%, it's crazy. So I think that we also have an issue in Web3. I want to know what you think about, and this being anonymous, right? I respect a lot people that want to remain 100% anonymous, or that have some privacy, don't want to share their face or whatever. But what do you think about having Anon developers or Anon security researchers working for your company? Do you think that if you have the correct security measures, that's okay? You would never do that. What do you think about that?
We don't hire anyone Anon here at Halborn. I think there's value in being public, not hiding in the shadows, this and that. I've always been very public in the security space. Not so much about crypto in general, but I just feel like it's important to give confidence. I will say that sometimes I do talk to clients that have fake names and, don't turn the camera on. I think that that's their decision. I respect why they're making it. My focus is just to make sure whatever it is you're building, we secure it. What you're doing with it is not our concern, but just making sure. But there is some value in it. If you look at, there's a protocol on Ethereum called Buccaneer. That dev is Anon. If you look at what happened with Tornado Cash, didn't work out so well. I still don't understand that, but sure. So there is value in being anonymous when you're kind of upsetting the traditional system. And we could talk all day about who Satoshie Nakamoto is, but I think that was a prudent decision to, I'd say pseudo Anon, not really Anon. So I understand the reasons for it, but I would say at least in Halborn, we don't do that. We want to make sure that, your engineers that are working on your code are people that, should be doing this, because you're entrusting your security to those individuals. And how would you feel if you're holding 50 million TVL in some protocol and you don't know the name of the guy that did the work for you? I don't know. I think from a professional standpoint, Anon is probably not the way to go.
Yeah. Who do you think is Satoshie Nakamoto? Yesterday, I read a new theory that says that, well, I don't know if you saw it, that it says that is the founder of TrueCrypt. You remember TrueCrypt? Okay, the founder is called Paul Sabbatella. Paul Sabbatella is similar. And Craig Wright used to work for that guy, and that guy is now in prison. So it's kind of, I don't know. I like reading this stuff, but the fact that he had created TrueCrypt, I said, oh.
Good background. I mean, I don't think it really matters. I think it's funny that people are so obsessed, but I think, I don't know, but I think it's someone that had a prior government background. That's my opinion. I don't know what government. I also don't think it's one individual. I also just, because I love the story, it could have been Hal. It could have been Hal. I mean,
yeah, totally.
With an Anon account, sending himself, like you said, trying to remain anonymous. He was a humble dude. Everyone likes Hal.
Yeah.
I'd like to think it was. Hopefully. I don't know. But
I like to think the same always. The running Bitcoin. Really, really nice guy. Let's go back to nation-state actors. What is the role of zero-day exploits in nation-state attacks? Who are the main developers and buyers in the market? Also, if you want to talk about
For exploit
0 day,
development?
0 days, 0 clicks also. So what do you think about all this?
So those types of teams that look for these 0 days exist in all nations. You know, Israel's got them. You've probably seen some of the NSO group and Pegasus spyware that Mexico's using, this and that. Great Britain has them. United States has them. China has them. Korea has them. Vietnam also, by the way, very good. They've been growing a lot in their sort of work. But there are dedicated teams that's their only job, is to look for these types of 0 days. Typically, the buying and selling is done on the dark web. Just in general, there are specific places and forums. Breach data used to be one. They just keep getting shut down and then new ones pop up. It's like constant. But that's typically done on the dark web. I have personally seen advertisements for 0 days posted for $200,000, $300,000. So there is a buying and selling market for it. The problem with a 0 day, besides the obvious, is once you use it, there are tons of people like me that are looking for indicators. Once you use the 0 day, you get one shot because some security researcher is going to figure it out and you get one window to do it. So they are very scary, of course, because there's nothing you can do to stop it. But you have to be very surgical with what you're going to do with it.
So do you think that 0 day exploits are like a threat to Web3? I mean, my question is, one would think that these exploits are bought by Intelexa, NSO, Zerodium, those companies, and that they only sell to three-letter agencies, right? Intelligence agency, countries, and all that. But do you think that also like nation-state threat actors or any other threat actor can get a hold of them and, for example, attack? I don't know. The breach we were talking about, the one for Max Infinity, running. I think that was a 0 day, for example, and because it was a PDF, I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah.
So do you think that it's a real threat to Web3, to some people in Web3, these 0 days, or there are more things for intelligence?
It's different because, right, so the code is available in Web3. There have been some cases. So Halborn, I think it was last year, discovered a 0 day in Cosm Wasm, which had to do with the capitalization. The variable was basically treated differently if it was capitalized or not capitalized. I think it's more of a concern for the Web 2. I definitely think individuals can get a hold of these 0 days, provided they have enough financial resources. It's not just nation states, but predominantly, like you said, the three-letter agencies, they're the ones buying this. But there may be more 0 days. We also found a 0 day in Doge and a bunch of forks of Doge. This is all public, like it's out there. We also worked with the different, foundations to kind of clean it up. So there will be more 0 days, but I have to hope that there are more people like myself, people like the people I work with at Halborn that are going to do ethical disclosure and correct the 0 days. Because the short-sighted answer for this, right? Like, oh, I got this 0 day and, it's in MetaMask, which we also found one of those a few years ago. I'm just going to steal whatever. I'm going to steal everyone's money. It's like, well, then it's not going to be worth anything because no one is going to use it anymore because it's all been compromised, right? So you have to be a little bit strategic if you're going to be a threat actor, right? If you compromise a specific protocol or a protocol's token, and that what's going to happen to the value of that token, right? So it's interesting, like just kind of looking at it from the tokenomics perspective and what impact that sort of 0 day could have.
Yeah, but talking more from the Web 2 side, let's say, from the attacking people, do you think that, for example, a business developer, should a business developer in crypto open any PDF, or you say, no, be careful with PDFs? I mean, we know that the PDF could have a 0 day exploit, but I think that they are pretty expensive, right? So
there's a few ways to go about this. One, there are tools out there that can scan for things. As an example, I don't know if you're familiar with Yara. It's great. It's a great language, like basically for catching specific variables. One of the techniques that I had used years ago when I was trying to detect Chinese hackers was we would scan every incoming PDF to see what keyboard was used to create the PDF. The thought was if they're using a ZH keyboard, and again, this is defense contracting, so we should really only be getting things written in the English keyboard. It was an indicator for us. So we kind of came up with novel methods to detect this stuff. I don't know how feasible that is in the Web3 environment where we don't have, defined organizations, infrastructure, we don't have centralization. In general, I would say don't open a PDF ever. However, the caveat to that would be if you have layered security controls on your system. There used to be a great tool for Mac called Little Snitch, which would tell you when things were going outbound, when things were making requests outbound. That would be an indicator that you've been compromised. But for a business development representative, they're not thinking about that, right? They're thinking about just getting the business in. So I would say not to open the PDF. And if you do want to open it, call the person who sent it. Call them, because no one picks up the phone anymore. If you're suspicious, just give them a call. Did you send this to me?
Yeah. When you talked about the keyboard, you made me remember. There was I remember some posts saying that some exploits were prepared not to exploit the specific countries, right? You had this virus or this malware that was specifically excluding Russia and Russia.
Oh yeah, I remember.
So they say, okay, if you configure a Russian keyboard in your computer apart from the English one, even if you don't use it, the malware will not affect you. I remember that I published that, and lots of people criticized me saying, what the fuck are you saying? That's not serious at all. So what do you think about? Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's a customized attack, basically. We don't want to impact these users. I mean, again, it's such a small little thing. Like, what's the keyboard language used? But it can have a profound effect. I think what you published is, I think it's great. I mean, like, it's something novel, right? I don't want to hit everyone in the world. I'm very politically motivated. And of course, there's hacktivists, there's political motivation and all of that. And that was a decision that those developers took.
Nice. Now we have a bit of more time. We have like 10 minutes, right? So let's go a bit to talk about self-custody, right? Let's change the subject. Considering the importance of custody for financial institutions working with digital assets, can you describe the best practices for securing private keys, including considerations for generation, storage, and secure recovery?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the recommendations are different if you're a financial versus your own self-custody. From a financial perspective, right, we always recommend MPC. Keeping the key shards separate. Don't use a single signer like Alex did for liquidity pools, please. It's super important because, like I was mentioning earlier, they can face criminal penalties for loss of customer funds if it's severe enough. The other thing I would say is separating your cloud tenant infrastructure. Don't keep your key signing, key shards, key storage in the same place that you run everything else in the cloud that you have. And most financials do this, like they keep it separate. Don't have it sync to the Active Directory. It's going to be a little bit more manual, but it needs to be done that way. In terms of the key ceremony itself, all the traditional physical controls, obviously recommended. If you can use HSMs, yes, good idea. If you can have, sometimes we do this, we do attestation, we witness the key being created. You need to have the air gap or some technically equivalent solution that doesn't allow it to connect. And then lastly, which most people don't think about, is recovery package. And I know, so big provider in the custody space, some organizations do their own. Like if you look at Fidelity, because they've kind of been on the forefront, but a lot of them will use a Coinbase, a BitGo, an Anchorage, or even Fireblocks. Fireblocks is a big player in the space. There are recovery packages that, when you talk to a crypto native, when Ledger introduced that, recovery package feature, like everyone's like, blah, blah, blah. But that's exactly the way it works in the business world, right? There's business relationships between the custody provider or the signing provider and all this and the keys. Because what do you do in the case where you lose a key shard? How do you recover this? We're not talking about losing, $20 on Doge. We're talking about billions of dollars. So those are kind of best practice areas to consider: your key storage, your key management, HSMs, multi-part computing, separate logical tenants, separate your virtualization technologies, containers, all of that you would want to do in general, but now you're doing it to a higher level, just because you're a financial.
And you mentioned MPC, right?
Yeah.
So could you go a bit deeper on the importance of multi-party computation in
Sure.
the context of blockchain and how it helps you to limit privileges and different kind of incidents? And for example, why do you prefer it over a multi-sig, for example, with SAFE, right?
To reduce the occurrence or likelihood of a collusion event. If let's say you need 2 of the 3 shards and just to sign something or move some funds, how likely or how possible is it that 2 employees, individuals, because that's typically the insider threat is the bigger concern, what would they have to do? What would they have to do to compromise it? So having the multi-party, whether it's physical people or systems, it potentially does slow things down a little bit, but it's a safety control just in general. So again, I know most people don't use it in their personal lives, and that's fine. But from a bank's perspective, if you look at some of the cases that have happened, right? Tellers, they get bribed by people. They don't pay them very well. So sometimes they get bribed to cash checks. It's the same thing. Now you have someone that has the keys to the kingdom, and it's, held with one individual or 2 or whatever. How much do you trust that won't, be taken advantage of? So that's the big reason for it. Is I know it's, we talk about decentralization, but it kind of goes back to that if you think about it, but decentralization for a different reason in this case. Oh, I think you're muted there.
Yeah, there we are. So how many more minutes do we have?
I probably need to get going in the next 7 minutes. Just
Perfect. So
yeah.
we have one more question.
Okay.
1 or 2 more questions. Great. So let's go a bit to, because I have so many things I want to talk to you. Let's go a bit to quantum computing and AI, right? So which are the main risks and challenges that security faces with the implementation of quantum computing? And do you think that we are fully aware of them, or we are 100% sure of how this is going to develop?
I don't think we're fully aware of them. I do think that if quantum computing becomes a reality, when it becomes a reality, it's not just crypto. It's going to be everything. Any SSL cert, anything you've ever done, any encrypted files, they can all be. And by the way, nation states, including the US and others, have reams of encrypted data that they've collected when you make your SSL connection. When we have the point where quantum breaks that, it's going to be basically digital meltdown. However, I don't think we will have that moment. Why? There are more advanced cryptographic algorithms you could use, elliptic curve, things like that. Right now, as an example, MD5 was broken. I think SHA-1 was as well in the last 2 years. Typical hashing algorithms. I see that the industry in general is going to have to move to a different hashing, a different encryption scheme. There are already quantum-resistant algorithms out there. They haven't been widely adopted yet. But if you look at the evolution just of, AES is a great example. AES 256 did come from the NSA, whatever, but it's largely trusted. Whether or not you think there's a backdoor in it, that's debatable. But the point is, when we talk about quantum, it changes the game because of the speed and the ability to look at old encrypted data and text. So I think as an industry, not just Web3, we are going to force it, much like the move from HTTP to HTTPS, except we're not going to have the luxury of waiting around for it. It needs to happen now. We need more quantum resistant algorithms. You asked also just about AI and the impact AI has. I said earlier, I can see it scanning code for vulnerabilities. I can see AI bots buying and selling coins. Why not? Like, why not put them to work, taking advantage of our? They're much faster than a human being, and they can take advantage of arbitrage opportunities, things like that. So it's going to be really interesting. And I do wonder at what point we get to when you're talking with someone online and it's 50%, 60, 70% bots. We'll get to that point where you won't know the difference of talking to a person or not.
Yeah. I see that a lot in Twitter with you saw these new spam bots that reply to your post saying something that is related, and then they recommend some project or shitcoin or whatever. At the beginning, I said, "This is real or not?" And then I found that it was all bots.
Yeah, it's
So,
all bots.
Yeah. So to close, I would like you have so much experience in cybersecurity. So I'd like you to give some advice for security professionals, right? For those that are new to the blockchain and digital assets security space, let's say, what key advice would you give them to start this journey in this rapidly evolving field?
I would say number one thing is do the work. If you're passionate about it, do it. You know, if you're tired, don't be tired. Don't be lazy. There's a saying in crypto, don't be lazy. Get it done. Best way to learn, honestly, is to use the protocols. You know, it doesn't have to cost a lot of money, right? There are companies, if you look at like Flipside Crypto, I love them because they give users the opportunity to earn a little bit of money by learning how to bridge, by learning how to swap, all of that. I think that's number one is use the technology. Number two is educate yourself. I know like in this space, it tends to be turn off brain, ape. And I get it. Okay. But at that point, you're just guessing and you're hoping that you're right. And I hope that you are right. But if you are right, just remember there's a lot of people that are wrong that are going to lose when you sell it to them. But read Gemini's Cryptopedia. I don't know if you know that resource. It is fantastic. No. My buddy
how's the name? I'll leave it in the show notes. Gemini's
Cryptopedia. There is a page, Pablo, on the Cryptopedia about everything. My old buddy was CISO there for a number of years, and it was an important project that he wanted his guy. So you want to read about how optimism works versus Arbitrum? They got a page for it. You want to know what ZK proofs do? There's a page for all sorts of stuff on Cryptopedia. So that would be number two. And then number three, and I know that this is hard, especially with today's times and everything, is if you're doing it for the money, it's not going to work. You have to. I help a lot of people get into cybersecurity. People come to me for advice, and I really love helping people because when I was coming up, we didn't have any of that. I made a lot of mistakes and this and that. So anytime someone asks for help, whether it be there's a college kid I've been helping, there's a guy that just got out of doing government work that I've been helping for the last 2 or 3 years, but he's dedicated himself to do it. You know, he's doing cloud certifications, he's learning. So you have to have the passion more so than don't get into crypto or security because you want money. Like, I get it. We all want money, but do it because it's something you believe in, that you're interested in.
Nice. I totally agree. Okay, Scott, it has been great having you here. Are you going to any conference this year? Developer Security Summit?
I will be at Permissionless this next week in Salt Lake City. I will also be at Money 2020 in Las Vegas at the end of the month. In general, Halborn does go to different events. It's just not always myself. But yeah, no, Token 2049, Breakpoint, all of those. But yeah, I'll be going to those, and Money 2020 should be very good. Obviously, it's very financial focused. So,
yeah. Okay, Scott, it has been a pleasure having you here. So thank you very, very much from me and from all of our listeners.
No, thank you, Pablo. Thanks for having me here. It was great.
So this has been the Blockchain Security Series episode 17 with Scott Renna, Senior Solutions Architect at Halborn. Thank you, everyone, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Blockchain Security Series, the podcast where the future of Web3 security unfolds. Presented by pablito.eth.